In 1975, one of the most powerful companies in the world accidentally invented the thing that would destroy it. A Kodak engineer built the world's first digital camera. When he showed it to his bosses, their response was 3 words: "Don't tell anyone." That was 37 years before bankruptcy. Kodak didn't fail because it missed the future. It failed because it invented the future, and then deliberately chose not to build it. That is a completely different kind of collapse. To understand how Kodak fell, you need to understand what it was built to be. 1880. George Eastman, a school dropout and amateur photographer from Rochester, New York, started manufacturing photographic dry plates in a rented room. By 1888, he had created the first consumer camera, preloaded with film designed for anyone to use. His advertising slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." Eastman didn't just start a company, he democratized photography. For the first time, ordinary people could capture their own lives. The idea was radical. The business it built was unlike anything before it. And that slogan wasn't just marketing. It was the entire business strategy. The camera was simple and often sold near cost, but every photo required Kodak film. Every roll you finished went through Kodak's developing labs. Every print you ordered was made on Kodak paper with Kodak chemicals. Cheap entry point, locked-in recurring revenue, what we now call the razor and blade model. Film processing margins were approximately 70%. Chemists inside Kodak reportedly said it was difficult to find anything legal with profit margins that high. Eastman hadn't just built a product, he had built a machine that printed money every time someone pressed a button. By the 1980s, that machine had become an empire. 90% of all films sold in the United States. 85% of all cameras. $16 billion in annual revenue at its peak, 145,000 employees worldwide, 60,400 of them in Rochester, New York alone. Entire generations of Rochester families built their lives around Kodak. It wasn't just a company, it was a community, a source of identity and pride for an entire city. And it felt permanent. The way things that are about to disappear always do. But Kodak's real asset wasn't the technology. It wasn't even the market share. It was the phrase that entered the English language. A Kodak moment. A moment too important to lose, too real to let pass without capturing it. Kodak built its brand at the intersection of technology and human emotion, and owned that intersection completely for decades. The brand wasn't about film. It was about memory, about family, about the idea that your life was worth preserving. That is extraordinarily valuable and extraordinarily fragile, because when the technology changed, the brand had nowhere left to stand. 1975. Inside Kodak's own research labs in Rochester, a 24-year-old engineer named Steve Sasson was given a simple assignment: see what you can do with the new CCD sensor technology. He built something nobody expected. The world's first digital camera. When he presented it to management, the response was not excitement, it was quiet concern. And then, according to Sasson himself, something close to burial. Don't tell anyone about this. A single instruction. 3 words that set the trajectory for everything that followed. To be fair, the prototype was genuinely primitive. It was the size of a toaster. It weighed 3.6 kilograms, it captured black and white images at 0.01 megapixels, and took 23 seconds to save a single photo onto a cassette tape. The image quality was nowhere near film, but that was never the point. The point was that it worked. The point was that it would get better, dramatically better, with time. Kodak's own engineers knew that, which is exactly what made it dangerous to acknowledge. If you were running Kodak in 1975, what would you have done? Keep that answer. You'll need it at the end. The decision wasn't made by fools. It was made by accountants, and the math was correct. Film processing margins, approximately 70%. Every photo taken meant film purchased. Every roll finished meant a developing session. Every print ordered meant Kodak paper and chemicals. Digital photography threatened every one of those revenue streams simultaneously. A single digital image cost Kodak nothing to store and paid them nothing in return. Going digital wasn't just adopting new technology, it was choosing to dismantle the most profitable business model in Kodak's history before a competitor forced you to. Almost nobody chooses that. Almost nobody can. And here is the part that makes the story even harder to process. In 1979, Kodak's own internal research team produced a forecast. It predicted that digital technology would replace film by approximately 2010. They weren't guessing. They had done the analysis. They built the model that predicted their own destruction, and then filed it away. By 1978, senior managers had seen similar internal predictions. They understood the direction of travel. They chose the film margins anyway. The warning existed. The evidence was internal. The decision to ignore it was deliberate. With digital looming and film revenue feeling fragile, Kodak tried to buy its way out of the problem. But instead of investing in digital, in the technology they had already invented, they bought a pharmaceutical company. In 1988, Kodak acquired Sterling Drug for $5.1 billion. At the time, it was the largest non-oil acquisition in U.S. history. It failed catastrophically. Sterling had no breakthrough drugs. The product pipeline was weak. Kodak sold it off by 1994, having spent billions on a detour that went nowhere. The wrong escape route, at exactly the wrong time, using money they couldn't afford to lose. Through the 1990s, the wave Kodak had forecast in 1979 arrived on schedule. Canon, Sony, Fujifilm, Nikon, every major competitor accelerated into digital. Prices dropped, image quality improved, consumer behavior shifted. By 2000, film sales began declining in earnest. By 2004, global film demand had entered a collapse so steep that within a decade it would fall to less than 1/10 of what it had been. The 1979 report had been correct down to the decade. The window had closed. The question was now only how fast. Through the 2000s, Kodak's board cycled through leadership trying to find an answer. Colby Chandler diversified and failed. Kay Whitmore restructured and failed. George Fisher, recruited from Motorola in 1993 with enormous fanfare as a technology sector leader, tried to reposition Kodak around digital imaging, still failed. Daniel Karp followed. Antonio Perez after him. Each leader understood the problem. Each launched initiatives. Each hit the same wall because the problem wasn't leadership. It was structure. The entire organization had been built to maximize film. You cannot rebuild an airplane while flying it. In 2001, Kodak was the #1 digital camera brand in the United States. Let that sit for a moment. They were winning the market. But film margins were 70%. Digital camera margins were approximately 5% or less. Every customer who bought a Kodak digital camera instead of film was generating 1/14 the revenue of their previous behavior. Kodak was running faster and earning less with every step forward. They had solved the market problem. They had not solved the business problem. In a company running on film profits, those are not the same thing. And here is what makes Kodak's story uniquely painful. The same disruption hit another company, and that company survived. Fujifilm faced an identical crisis, same product, same margins, same collapsing film demand. But in 2004, Fujifilm's CEO Shigetaka Komori launched Vision 75, a radical transformation plan. He aggressively cut the film business down to its real size. Then he reinvested in industries where Fujifilm's existing skills could win. Film chemistry is closely related to skincare science. The same antioxidants and collagen stabilization used in film applied directly to cosmetics and healthcare. Fujifilm applied it. They also pivoted into medical imaging, pharmaceuticals, and industrial materials. By 2023, healthcare generated nearly half of Fujifilm's revenue. The same disruption. Two completely different choices. Same problem. One company survived, one didn't. The difference wasn't the disruption, it was the decision. But even Fujifilm's pivot wouldn't have saved Kodak from what nobody had prepared for. The phone camera. 2007, the iPhone. 2010, Instagram. Phone cameras didn't just accelerate the shift from film to digital. They made standalone cameras, the entire product category Kodak had pivoted toward, effectively irrelevant for most consumers. You were no longer choosing between film and digital. You were choosing between a camera and the phone already in your pocket. The question Kodak had been trying to answer became the wrong question overnight. The numbers collapsed in a way that left no room for recovery. 1996, $16 billion in revenue, 145,000 employees worldwide. By 2007, revenue below $10 billion, tens of thousands of jobs gone. By 2011, revenue had fallen to roughly $6 billion. Rochester area employment, once 60,400, had shrunk to under 5,200. These weren't just statistics. These were families. These were careers. These were neighborhoods in Rochester that had been built on the certainty that Kodak would always be there. And then came perhaps the single worst individual decision in this story. In 2007, facing mounting losses, Kodak sold its healthcare imaging division. Healthcare imaging, the exact intersection of photography technology and medical demand. In 2007, the world's population was aging. Demand for diagnostic imaging was about to accelerate significantly. It was one of Kodak's most viable businesses. They sold it to fund the failing consumer camera division. 2 years later, aging demographics drove medical imaging revenue upward for competitors, including Fujifilm. Kodak had sold tomorrow to pay for today. January 19, 2012. Kodak filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. 132 years after George Eastman started manufacturing dry plates in a rented room in Rochester, $6.8 billion in liabilities, the workforce reduced from 145,000 at peak to fewer than 19,000. The company that gave the world the ability to preserve its memories could no longer preserve itself. George Eastman had said, "You press the button, we do the rest." In 2012, nobody was pressing the button anymore. The sharpest comparison in this story came the same year. In 2012, the year Kodak filed for bankruptcy, Facebook acquired Instagram for $1 billion. Instagram had 13 employees. Instagram was a photo-sharing app. It was built on the exact emotional territory Kodak had owned for a century, capturing moments, preserving memories, making images matter. Kodak had 132 years of history and filed for bankruptcy. Instagram had 13 employees and sold for $1 billion. The same product, a completely different understanding of who the customer actually was. After bankruptcy, Kodak attempted to generate cash by selling its most valuable remaining asset, its digital photography patents. Over 1,100 patents, the intellectual property built from Steve Sasson's 1975 prototype and decades of digital research. The foundation of the technology that had made everyone else's products possible. They sold for approximately $525 million in 2013. The buyers included Apple, Google, Samsung, and Facebook, the companies that had built trillion-dollar businesses on top of technology Kodak had invented, suppressed, and then sold for a fraction of its true value. Kodak was never a film company. It was a memory company. Its product was the ability to preserve your life. A Kodak moment was the promise, not a roll of film, not a set of chemicals. When smartphones gave everyone a powerful camera in their pocket, free, instant, permanent, they didn't replace Kodak's product. They fulfilled Kodak's original promise better than Kodak ever had. If Kodak had understood this, it might have built Instagram before Instagram existed. It had the brand trust, the distribution, the emotional authority, and the technology. It just couldn't see past the film. Blockbuster's story was the innovator's dilemma. Kodak's was worse. Blockbuster missed a competitor. Kodak created one and suppressed it. Every other company that built digital photography was building on top of foundations that Kodak had laid. They were catching up to technology Kodak had already built in 1975. The cage wasn't built by a competitor. It was built from the inside, with perfect awareness, because the present felt more survivable than the future. That is the hardest possible version of the dilemma, when you can't embrace your own invention because it threatens your present, even when you built both. Before the summary. One question. Is there something in your own work where you already know what needs to change? You've seen the data, you've read the signals, but the cost of changing feels higher than the cost of waiting. That's not ignorance. That's exactly Kodak's real trap. The danger isn't missing the signal, it's understanding the signal perfectly and choosing the margin anyway. So, was Kodak's failure inevitable? Or could different leadership have changed the outcome? A or B? Drop it in the comments. A. Inevitable. The innovator's dilemma makes this impossible to escape from the inside. B. Leadership. The right CEO at the right moment could have pivoted like Fujifilm. Why did Kodak fail? 5 reasons. 1. They invented the disruptor and silenced it. In 1975, they saw the future and chose not to build it. 2. They optimized for margins instead of survival. 70% versus 5%. The math made staying feel rational when it was fatal. 3. They escaped in the wrong direction. $5.1 billion on sterling drug, when the answer was already in their own labs. 4. They sold tomorrow to pay for today. The healthcare imaging division went in 2007 at the worst possible time to fund a dying business. 5. They couldn't self-disrupt. Fujifilm did it. Kodak never could. None of these failures are unique to Kodak. They are the signature of every great company that loses to a smaller, faster, hungrier competitor. The only real protection is seeing the pattern in yourself before it's too late. Kodak's story ends with one image. In 2013, Apple and Google bought the patents Kodak's own engineers had spent decades building, the foundation of the digital world, for $525 million. The buyers were the future Kodak had invented and refused to inhabit. If this video made you think, hit like. It costs nothing and it helps the channel reach more people. A or B in the comments. I read them all. New story every week. Subscribe and you won't miss it. See you there.